we will move to that. Paul and Jacob, if you could kindly take your seats. So we've allocated 15 minutes for your deputation. So if you could kindly introduce and say what it is, and then allow for the panel members to ask them questions if they need any clarification. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. This deputation concerns the converted properties cleaning service charge, which was introduced in 2018 for tenants, and the Council has now accepted that most of the tenants received no service at all in the first year of the service charge, and also that in the second year of the service charge, the tenants had to pay the leaseholder contribution as well as their own, while the leaseholders, of course, paid as well. We want to talk about some of the reasons why this has happened and what we can do about it. Now, we've spent so much time and bother about service charges in particular because service charges are an increasingly significant but unacknowledged part of gross rent, and they're a significant cause of poverty. And so they get forgotten about. So something like the shelter report that's come out called The Capital in Crisis, it's a really important report about rents. It backs up 100% what this council's done over rent policy, supporting social rent rather than mayor's rent. And then there's a gap in it because it talks about rent and whether people can pay the rent, but there's no mention of service charges. Most of the people that they're quite rightly so concerned about will be paying service charges as well as rent. And so, why do we have increased service charging? Well, we have it partly because government is preventing other ways of funding the housing service, and partly because government has encouraged local authorities and housing associations to use more service charges in the last 20 years, basically. And so, just looking now at this particular service charge and what happened, as far as we know, it was introduced in 2018. The Cabinet was given inaccurate information about it. The Cabinet was told that this was an existing service that tenants had not been charged for. It wasn't. It was a new service, as far as we know, introduced without any consultation. The council was then, or Homes for Haringey, unable to deliver any service to the majority of the tenants who were being charged for it. And then when you go into year two, there was an increase in the service charge of 89%. And this happened for two separate reasons. The first one is that the council argued that for 4 of the 6 service charges introduced in 2018, 6 new service charges, 4 of them, they said that they'd made a mistake and miscalculated the number of tenants receiving the service, that the number of tenants receiving the service was lower than they had thought, and therefore the tenants had to pay more. And this is a Alice in Wonderland argument, quite frankly, because if there's less work to do, why should the tenants have to pay more money? It doesn't, in order to match the budget. It doesn't make any sense. Value for money going right out the window. So that's something we're really concerned about there. And the other reason why the increase happened is because of paying the leaseholder contribution. Now, this was something that Homes for Haringey officers raised with the council officers. Council officers at one point agreed that they wouldn't do it, and then they broke the agreement, as far as we know. And I've emailed members of the panel the evidence where we can see that happened. And then we have year 3, which is the year we're about to enter, 2020 to 21, where the council then has agreed about the things that have gone wrong in the last 2 years. Most of the tenants are getting some money back. There's one small group who we think ought to get some money back that's not yet been agreed, and that's been, that can be looked at. But the big major thing is that it appears that overcharging is taking place again in 2020. 21, where once again the tenants are paying the leaseholder contribution as well as their own. And we're, you know, there's one action we want you to take. Guess what? It's please take a look at that and make sure that that doesn't happen. If that was not the case, the other possible alternative, which might be true, is that for some reason there's been a need to have a 47% increase in the budget and a 47% increase in service charge. But nobody has been told what that reason might be, and we don't believe that that is the case. And then just finally, I'll say that next month, a new challenge is coming along for the Council, which is a new regulatory regime that the regulator for social housing, that in the past concerned itself only with housing associations, is going to regulate local authorities. There is a rent standard, there is a government rent document as well, which specifies certain minimum standards regarding service charges, consultation on new service charges, an obligation to keep the costs to residents down, including maximum increases of, or not maximum, preferred increases, as it were, of whatever it's called, CPI plus 1%. And these are standards that Haringey, as it stands, is not meeting at all. I had a look at my tenancy agreement. I was absolutely, which is revised by the Council in 2011. I was horrified to read it, to be honest. What it says over rent and service charges, you get no consultation, we'll just tell you what to pay. No mention of what is going to be service charged, no mention of any control over any new service charges that might be introduced, no mention of any what the amounts might be, no mention of any what excess increases at all. And we don't believe that having no consultation is good practice. We also, and again this is finally, before I shut up, that there's an equalities issue here, which we put in our response to the budget consultation this year. It turned up in the reports pack that every councillor had, simply that when council tenants and resident households on council estates are not consulted, specifically not selected as it were not to be consulted, there's a serious equalities issue there. You don't need me to spell it out. It's quite clear which kinds of groups are being disadvantaged. In other words, poorer groups and ethnic minorities have been disadvantaged. There has been no response whatsoever from officers or councillors to those comments. But these are the kind of issues that are going to come forward. And, okay, if I may, Chair, just for another sentence, which is that I've been sorry to be so negative, because these are criticisms. We criticise, however, with a purpose. These are issues where, if we get them right, we can change things, we can demand changes from others, and we can take on the kind of people that are running the government of this country and start to combat poverty and serve the people that I know you're elected to represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Typically, we only allow 3 minutes for this bit, but I've allowed you 7 minutes. It's because, you know, you were on a flow. I just didn't want to stop you. As a panel members, I can already see Councillor Hare. You've got a question that you want to ask. Is there anybody else? It would be good just to see. Okay, far away.
It's just a clarification, Paul. Thank you very much for all of that, which is really clear. But I missed something. There was another reason, as well as equalities. Towards the end, it was the equalities issue you raised. You raised another one just before that, and I missed it. About the consultation on new service charges, and you mentioned something, and then you said it's also an equalities issue. So I just wondered, I missed the something. I'm very sorry.
I'm sorry, Bob, I'm still not quite sure. The regulation is the really important thing. So regulation is coming in next month. The standards that are set, Haringey is not going to meet at the moment. It includes our tenancy agreements, which are very poor on this issue. Those are the points I made as far as I remember.
Councillor Gordon.
Thanks. Yeah, I can see that you've been corresponding on this matter since early February. I think maybe even before then, from last year. And can you just tell us what responses you've had either from officers or cabinet members or Homes for Haringey?
Yes, we did a big piece of work on this for the 2019 review of charges, and following that I then put in freedom of information request, got a huge amount of really useful information about how the decisions are being made. But I mean, what's really shocking is the fact that there was a disengagement by the council to us. So even though we did deputations to the cabinet and to full council, our questions were not answered accurately, or in some cases not answered at all. The only way to find out what the council's position was to do freedom of information requests. So that was, you know, really difficult, though perhaps not too surprising. And then just add that this year, what would really be helpful would be if cabinet members would respond to correspondence. There was a generalised problem last year, which I raised with the governing party's chief whip, but the situation hasn't really changed at all. It would be really helpful if correspondence was to be answered by the cabinet members, as it is answered by officers. Officers do answer in a much more timely manner, but we want to talk to both, really, and obviously mainly to the people who make the decisions.
Councillor Stone.
Hi, Paul. Thanks. Perhaps I just missed this, but and if I'm getting it wrong, please tell me I am. But did you said that tenants are paying where leaseholders are not, or that tenants are paying some contributions more than what they should be, that leaseholders aren't paying those contributions? And if you did say that, what could you explain a little bit more about how that works, or how that's come to be in your view?
Yes, my view is that the council's actions have been divisive. I think, to be honest, I think they've been deliberately divisive over a period of time. And there are many times when leaseholders get billed for tenant repairs, for example, when they should not be billed for that. And then in this particular case, we've had a situation where the tenants have been billed for the leaseholder contribution as well as their own. Now, the leaseholders have also been billed. I mean, this is absolute chaos here, and I personally don't think that it's about it's a matter of incompetence. We all make mistakes sometimes, but I don't think this is driven by incompetence. I think it's a revenue-driven service. And I think to introduce a service charge when you're not able to deliver the service for a whole year indicates that you're more interested in the revenue than you are in providing a service to the customers. That's the first thing that's got to change.
Yeah, I mean, on the face of it, if you read all of the email trails, it might look like a series of mistakes, and we're not here to sort of schadenfreude or whatever the word is about mistakes. But what we're more concerned about is that actually they were there's a danger that things like this aren't really mistakes. That with service charges and other charges that have been brought in, it is an attempt to create a surplus, and that some of the laxness about getting it right and making sure we're only charged for services we actually receive may be because there's a general corporate spirit that really is just about bringing the money in, rather than this slightly dubious idea that we needed this particular service charge, that the tenants concerned needed this particular service in the first place. We're worried about this, and we think that, there needs to be... There needs to be a review, really, of how service charges are levied in the first place, whether there is a need for a service charge, and also a review into the decisions about how they are increased. And, thirdly, if that all goes through, a review, scrutiny about whether the service is being provided, whether what's being charged for is actually being provided. We think this is the role of a scrutiny committee, because it just seems really like that otherwise, unless we're here to sort of pull everyone to account, and we're not going to be here forever, we could go or leave or die or something like that, then this process will just carry on of ramping up the service charges on people in a unfair and arguably unlawful way.
Okay, so I've got a question from Councillor Barnes and then a quick one from Councillor Gordon, because we are coming to the end of the time allocated for this part. So if you go to Councillor Barnes and then Councillor Gordon.
So I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned that there's a new regulator for social housing, or it exists, but it will now look after council homes as well. So have you asked questions of the council as to whether or not they're prepared for that? And would it make sense to look at that in conjunction with these changes? Because if there are going to be changes to service charges and what can be charged and so on, then we could look at that in one whole bunch, which would make more sense. And then the retrospective ones, I've got residents who've been charged for services they've not had as well, which we've taken up. And I think I've spoken with Alan about one of those at one point. So I've had almost personal experience.
Just point of... Oh, sorry.
We are going to take 2 questions.
Yeah, so just for the sake of clarity, for the 2020-2021 year, you're estimating that it should be £1.11 per week, and at the moment the charge is still at £1.77 per week. So there's still a discrepancy that we are going into a future year. Is that correct? And that's just a sort of basic question of clarity. And I'm thinking that we should have either special item agenda on this, where if there's no officers that can, I don't see any officers wanting to come in to answer these points, either from Homes for Haringey or our own housing. And if they're not going to answer here and now, could we have a special item on the agenda, or maybe a sort of like one-day review? I'm not sure whether that's what Councillor Barnes was suggesting.
With the new legislation.
It might well be worth, having something, a larger item on that, with all the relevant officers that can answer the questions here.
Before I hand over to you, Paul, because we are almost towards the end, or in fact we've gone slightly over for the time allocated for this. So if you could kindly address those 2 questions, and also just make your concluding remarks in terms of what you would like us to take forward, and if there is a response that you would like us to get for you, please do tell us as well.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the questions and discussion. I think the issue of the regulator is really important. I think that's a bit of a wake-up call to Haringey, and I have written to Amina Ibrahim suggesting that it's looked at in that way as an opportunity to improve the standards, including the input of residents into the way that the service is managed. So that's really important. Yeah, so the issue of the next year's charge, helpfully, because our tenancy agreements are so awful, it says that the council can change the service charge at 1 week's notice. So having adopted this charge, which is not so good, they can introduce a better one at 1 week's notice, and we'd encourage you to do that. If you read the stuff, obviously it's a bit detailed and a bit nerdy, as it were, but if you read Simon Eversley's very helpful email, he says that for the current year, he says that the service charge should have been £1.20 a week, and the council has now decided to impose £1.77 for the next financial year, and that's 47% higher, without a word of explanation. Now, it's not a question of, even if there aren't going to be legal rights or enforceable contractual rights to consultation, there ought to be an explanation of why the council is doing what it is doing about every significant aspect of the council's work. And you can see that's just not happening in this particular situation. So there's a lot of catching up that needs to be done, and obviously we're always available to work with you to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. We will take that away, and as has been suggested, maybe it's also an agenda item in its own right in one of the future meetings, or even some form of scrutiny that we decide to do. So we'll have a think about that. And obviously, in terms of the response that you've had already from Homes for Haringey I can see that there is already, I mean, still there is some gap, and you would like some further explanation and possibly a reversal of the increase in the service charge. So we'll make those representations as well. Okay, thank you. So we now move to the minutes of the last meeting, which are at